Welcome to The Explainer. Ever wonder how people actually study politics? Well, you're in the right place. Today, we're going to break down the different toolkits thinkers use to make sense of our incredibly complex political world. So, let's start with a really big question. When you look at the political world, what should you even focus on? Should you be trying to figure out what's right and what's just? Or should you focus on what you can actually see and measure? This one question creates a massive fault line that runs right through the entire study of politics. And that's the key thing right there. There's no single final answer. The political theorist Andrew Hacker put it perfectly when he called political theory a never-ending conversation. The whole point isn't to find one correct theory that shuts everyone up, but to understand all the different perspectives and, well, join the conversation. All right, so here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll talk about these big debates that really define the field, values versus facts, and the old-school traditional approaches versus the modern ones. Then we're going to open up that traditional toolkit to see exactly what's inside. And finally, we'll tie it all together and talk about why any of this actually matters today. Okay, let's dive right in. The best way to think about studying politics is not as a set of fixed rules, but as this huge dialogue that's been going on for centuries. And this conversation has always circled back to a few key debates. And the first and most important one is about what we should even be looking at in the first place. Which brings us to the first great debate, the absolute heart of this whole thing, values versus facts. I mean, it really all boils down to one simple choice. Is our goal to figure out how politics should work based on our morals and values? Or should we only describe how it actually works based on stuff we can observe? This one question creates the fundamental divide we're about to explore. And this slide just lays out that tension perfectly. On one side, you've got the normative approach. It's all about figuring out what's right. It asks what ought to be. It's trying to build a blueprint for a perfect world. Then, on the other side, you have the empirical approach. This one's about what's real. It asks what is. Its whole goal is just to describe political reality as it is, using data we can see and measure. Like, say, analyzing how people voted in the last election. Okay, so that brings us to our next section, because that whole debate between values and facts, it's not just some abstract idea. It actually played out in a huge historical shift in how people studied politics. We're talking about the move from traditional to contemporary, or modern, methods, the second great debate that basically reshaped the entire field. Yeah, as you can see here, World War II was a massive turning point. Before the war, political study was all about the traditional approaches. These were mostly normative, focused on big philosophical questions, drawing from history and law. But after the absolute horrors of the war, a lot of people felt like these old methods had failed. A new generation came along and wanted to make political science more scientific. And that gave rise to these contemporary empirical approaches that focus on hard data, observable behavior, and objective analysis. So what was actually in that traditional toolkit anyway? Let's pop it open and take a look. Traditional thinkers didn't just have one way of doing things, they had a bunch of different lenses they used to analyze the political world. We're going to look at the four big ones. First up, the oldest tool in the kit, the philosophical approach. I want you to picture someone like Plato in ancient Greece. He wasn't trying to describe the Athens he saw around him. He was trying to imagine the perfect city. This approach doesn't care about polling data or election results. It cares about those huge, timeless questions. What is justice? What is freedom? Its goal is to set up a moral compass for politics. And this quote from T.H. Green is a perfect example of that. See how it works? It's building a logical chain, but not from data. It's from a moral idea about what it means to be human. It starts with a value, consciousness, and liberty. And from there, it logically concludes that we need a state to protect our rights. That's the philosophical method in a nutshell. The next tool in the box is the historical approach. And its core idea is simple, but so powerful. Politics doesn't just appear out of nowhere. If you want to understand why a country has a certain kind of government today, you have to look at its history, its revolutions, its leaders, its big turning points. Political institutions are basically fossils of the past, and this approach is all about digging them up to see how they were formed. Okay, tool number 3, the legal approach. This one treats politics kind of like a board game. It focuses on the official rulebook, the Constitution, the laws. This lens doesn't really care about a politician's charisma or their big ideas. It cares about the legal powers of their office. It's all about understanding the formal, written-down rules that say who can do what. And our final traditional tool is the institutional approach. So if the legal approach is the rulebook, This one is about the actual game pieces. It looks at the machinery of government, the legislature, the executive, the courts. It's less about the law and theory and more about how these formal institutions actually work in practice. How their gears turn and interact to create political outcomes. So, after looking at all these different lenses and these big debates, you might be sitting there thinking, okay, so which one is the right one? But that's not really the right question. The real question is, why is it so important to know about all of them? And here it is, the big takeaway. A good political analyst is like a good mechanic. They don't just have one wrench. You can't fix an engine with only a hammer, right? Well, you can't get a full picture of politics with just one approach either. A truly complete understanding means you have to combine the empirical, what is, with the normative, what ought to be. And this quote from our source material just says it perfectly. The goal isn't to pick a winner between normative and empirical or traditional and contemporary. The real challenge, and really the whole point, is to build a bridge between them, to use the facts we observe to inform our values, and to let our values guide us on which facts are even worth studying in the first place. And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. As you look at the political world around you, all the debates, the conflicts, the governments, which of these classic lenses helps you make the most sense of it all? Is it the deep philosophical questions, the long shadow of history, the formal rules of law, or the nuts and bolts of government institutions? Something to chew on.